No more tea, Emma dear. You have been more than kind, and the cake was most delicious. Why, the strawberries are extraordinary this year, are they not? Sweet and plump, like little red hearts. But returning to your question, yes, I have been seeing dear Miss Thompson and her friends. Well, Juliet is a charming and talented girl, and her friends are kindly. Many of them are well placed. Somehow one doesn't quite dare hope for that among the religious, if I may say so. As you know, I'm essentially pragmatic, but she does insist so sweetly that sometimes I attend. She's always gracious at the meetings, though I understand little of what she says. And since her visit to Palestine, she has seemed, well, how shall I say, not quite of this world. She talks of nothing but the one she calls the master, an occult sounding term. I quite dislike it. But I confess, Emma, he does intrigue me. I mean, a prisoner for 40 years and now at an advanced age, coming to America with a message of brotherly love and peace. Why, it's like a fable. The newspapers are full of it, of course. Miss Thompson has been beside herself since learning he would come, and I naughtily allowed her to persuade me to meet him, not giving her false hope by permitting her to see how avidly curious I was. You can picture it, Emma, my pretending indifference, yet half fearing she would cease insisting, and then my casting about for some means to accomplish this without upsetting my husband. Wingate is an avowed agnostic, as he eagerly informs anyone who will listen, and no doubt would disown me. His conception of my social role outside the home, I'm afraid, extends no further than my charities and my service on the Opera League. And he's always been embarrassed by what he calls my brother's Episcopalian delusions. But where was I? Oh, yes, the master. How queer that that name should come so readily to my lips. Abdu'l-Bahá Abbas Effendi would be more proper forms of address, I suppose. Well, I was a guest at a gathering at someone's house, a rather good address, though what Juliet told the hostess, I cannot think, and indeed I never met her, so great the crush. A strange assortment, some Orientals, Persians, I suppose, a colored gentleman. Well, Wingate would use another term, but you see, one can in the South without offense. 2 Chinese, and some of what one might describe as the laboring class, a struggling artist or two, and one who might have been a poet from Miss Thompson's seemingly endless circle of co-enthusiasts. Others, too, who appeared both charming and distinguished, but on the whole, one was struck both by the ordinariness of the people of this group and fascinated by the idea of their being linked together through curiosity or devotion. And the master was present, Abd'ul-Baha, and he appeared, well, how shall I say, noble, majestic, serene. It was rather as though a great light had come into the room. Do you find me sentimental? One felt an overpowering need to win his approval, like a child with an adored teacher. And he spoke, not at length, but with extreme simplicity and power. His voice is gentle, hypnotic, one might say irresistible. Though I scarcely remember the words, it was rather his presence which compelled, but something of his father's sufferings and his own message and a few words about his own imprisonment. Well, the words seemed the least part of it. One could not resist feeling a sympathy, of course, but for me, what he said was not the central point. How can I say this, Emma, and be sure I'm understood? As he spoke, I asked myself, why is he here? What does he want of us? He's not young. What can possibly come of this journey in the West? And it came to me, Emma, that his being here represents an unvoiced invitation. Perhaps I should say command, for it is his presence which expresses it, rather than what he says. A command, then, that we make an adjustment in our lives. Am I making sense? I almost exclaimed out loud, why, he wants us to be like him, not in an imitative way, but to step into his world and to somehow transform this one. And I wondered if the others knew this too, and perhaps this is what Miss Thompson has been telling me all along, and I simply have not understood. But it bore in on me there in his presence, profoundly bore in, that he asks us to make an adjustment of the soul, if I may use that term, Emma, to become spiritually renewed. This all happened as a flash, and these things do, Emma. And there was more. In that moment, I knew that I might, well, what can I say? Follow him, in the sense Miss Thompson uses that word. Oh, not on my knees in the dust, as she doubtless would, though perhaps that too, but in my own way follow him, that he might represent a standard to which I could devote my life. There I was in my mind, throwing myself at his feet, sobbing and covering them with kisses. It was, well, Emma, it was most unsettling. But in the same moment of realizing this truth about myself, I felt a deep loss, a heart-piercing loss. I heard myself saying, not aloud, of course, though I scarcely knew at the time what I might have done. I heard myself saying, it's too late for me. And tears stung my eyes at that moment. Pictures of Wingate and the children flashed into my mind, and a picture of our house and myself presiding at one of Wingate's functions. And I looked about that room and I thought, well, how could I open my home to all these people? And how could I present them to Wingate's mother? In following the master, you see, you open your door to the world. My choices have been made, I realized. And in my feeling of loss, I saw the faces around me as alien, as hateful. In that moment, I felt a loathing even for Miss Thompson, who has been the essence of kindness. The people appeared, how shall I put it, smug and conspiratorial, a closed circle. I felt excluded and I detested them. I saw them as Wingate might see them, as pitiable objects of derision, as caffeyed and fawning and mooning about like biblical figures at the feet of Christ in some shabby tableau. They seemed naive, even incredibly stupid. Well, of what use are any of these to him, I thought. He is of a different world. What can possibly come of this journey he is making? These talks, this pathetic handful. How can any of this matter? All this in a split second, as I said, and then I closed my eyes against my tears, and it is perhaps just as well I had not met the hostess, because then, unforgivably, and I blush to say it, I fainted. The room was stifling, and I had unwisely worn a velvet frock. Well, I've never in my life engaged in that deplorable female diversion. Wingate's mother faints at every conceivable opportunity, but I despise the practice, always having supposed it to be an artifice. But there it was, Picture it if you can, Emma. I must have blacked out for only a few moments. Someone was fussing about and making well-meaning but clumsy efforts to loosen my collar, and my eyes opened to see the master rising and coming towards me, bearing the cup of tea someone had just placed in his hand. He came to me urgently, and yes, tenderly, and his voice and his eyes were almost stern. Drink, drink, he said. Wherever the master is, he's the center of attention. So, of course, all eyes were upon me as I took a timid sip. No offense to you, dear, but never have I tasted such tea as from his hand. And then he smiled dazzlingly and leaned down to me, whispered in English. His tone was so pitched, no one else heard. It is acceptable, he said. It is acceptable. His eyes appeared to lend a significance beyond what the words conveyed. And I was happy no longer to be the center focal point of that room. And he turned and the others engaged him. Soon it was over and we all left. Well, I've not seen Miss Thompson since, nor have I answered her calls, and I will not discuss this with her. Isn't it strange, Emma? But I feel this is private in some acutely intense way. This is mine. Obviously, I must extricate myself from her group, gently, of course, for I have no wish to harm her, however laudable or desirable the objectives of her circle. It's too late for me. Perhaps it's too late for all of us. Oh, how my husband and my parents would scorn all my gushing, all the emotional tumult that meeting has unleashed. Though perhaps, Emma, I do not really know them at all. Do you ever feel that those you love are strangers? I cannot imagine how I appear to my husband or explain the sense of remoteness from him sometimes I experience. It's odd to feel divorced from one's own life center. But anyway, too late, you see, too late. As Wingate says, this is the age of reason and enlightenment, the century of prosperity and progress and peace. And the world struggles along well enough without its seers and sages. He may well be right. But Emma, the master, if only you could see him. Extraordinary, wasn't it? His saying what he did. I wonder whether I shall ever understand it.